everybody. This is Carol Maletta. Welcome to the Parenting 411 podcast, where we share information parents need from sources they can trust. On the Parenting 411 podcast, we often explore the incredible stories of resilience and transformation that inspire us to navigate life's challenges with courage and hope. And today is no different. I'm honored to speak with Ellen Busch, a remarkable life coach and dyslexia advocate who will join us on this journey. Ellen's story is one of overcoming adversity and defying expectations. Diagnosed with dyslexia at a young age, she was often told she wasn't enough. But with the unwavering support of her parents, Ellen discovered her strength through real-world experiences and adventure. Thank you for joining me today, Ellen.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So take us back. You were diagnosed with dyslexia. How old were you, and what were your feelings about it at the time as a child? And then let's talk about how your parents responded.
Sure. Great question. So initially, I was diagnosed as ambidextrous, which is interesting in itself. Further testing, specifically the WIS test, Wishler Intelligence Test.
Oh, I'm familiar with that. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Of course, the version I took was very different because it was many years ago. Mm-hmm. They came up with the diagnosis of dyslexic.
Okay.
And I was 6 or 7 years old.
Okay.
And unfortunately, the theory at the time, which has since been debunked, as I understand, was that if you were ambidextrous, you didn't have a dominant eye. And if you didn't have a dominant eye, you could not learn to read because you couldn't track across a page. So they actually held me back several years from learning to read. So I did not begin to learn to read until the end of second grade.
That's interesting.
It is interesting.
I didn't know that about the whole thing about being ambidextrous and the correlation to the eye and then to reading.
Well, I believe it has been debunked. I've talked with education experts who say that that's no longer an accepted theory. But unfortunately, I got the consequence of the theory at the time.
Right. So how did your parents respond?
My parents said no. And not no to the diagnosis, but no to the condemnation and the stereotype or the bias that came with it. There was a rather ugly parent-teacher conference when my parents were notified. The attitude of the administrator was less than professional.
Oh, wow.
She basically said that I might finish high school, but college was out of the question. I would not be contributing to society other than as a wife and a mother, and they should focus on finding a husband who would take care of me.
Wow. And what were you? You said you were 6 years old.
Yeah.
I would love to say that, well, it is surprising a little bit, but I certainly have had that experience. I have a son who was diagnosed with learning disabilities as a toddler, and every step of his journey, he heard from naysayers, his preschool teacher, his middle school teacher, who said he'd never go to college. And not only did he go to college, he got accepted to 4 colleges, and he finished college in 4 years. I mean, not that he had to, but he did. Right. So it sounds like, your parents, like you said, they didn't buy it, and they set about helping you create a fulfilling life. So let's talk about their unconventional approach to education and all that they poured into you.
So that parent-teacher conference ended with my mother pounding her fist on the desk saying, "I refuse to allow you to condemn my daughter." They had no idea who they were dealing with.
I hear you. I can totally relate. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
So what did they start doing?
So they were completely supportive and in many different ways. So my mom got very involved with the school system. She was what they used to call a class mom. So
Mm-hmm.
she would volunteer her time in the classroom, and that was, different moms did that. We're talking about the mid-70s at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a different time.
Mm-hmm.
She helped me with my homework every single day. She
Mm-hmm.
was emotionally supportive. My
Mm-hmm.
dad was kind of my cheerleader. My dad was always the one who he gave me some mantras, like, prove him wrong, Ellen, prove him wrong. You know you can do it.
Right.
And, they really helped me to cope with my frustration
Mm-hmm.
and getting me to settle down. I would try and do my homework and I'd throw my paper across across the dining room table and just burst into tears and frustration.
Mm-hmm.
And they would help me calm down and settle down and work through each question with me one at a time. My
Mm-hmm.
dad used to say all the time, Ellen, one question at a time, just one question at a time. So
Mm-hmm.
he was teaching me micro goals.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was also an Army veteran, and he really understood that the important life lessons really happen outside of the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So things, taking on challenges. He also realized, I think both my parents realized at a very young age that I know now I have the explorer archetype.
Okay.
So I'm always adventurous, super curious. We had a summer home on Fire Island, so we lived in a very much beach ocean environment.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was an avid fisherman by
Mm-hmm.
hobby.
Mm-hmm.
And at a very young age, he started teaching me everything he knew. He
Mm-hmm.
taught me things like how to navigate, how to read the ocean, how to, understand the environment that you're in. I
Mm-hmm.
used to have to stand on an upside down bucket so I could
Mm-hmm.
reach the steering wheel of his boat.
Okay.
So I was really young, 8, 9 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and those are really, those are great skills. Those are important skills. And then
Absolutely.
later, as I got older, age appropriate kind of challenges. He sent me on Outward Bound when I was 15 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I don't misunderstand. I wanted to go. I spent
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks on the Green River in Utah, hiking, climbing, rappelling, and whitewater rafting.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a game changer for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then at 17, he asked me if I wanted to learn to become a certified scuba diver.
Okay.
And
Is that something
jump,
he knew how to do already or?
nope, he
Nope.
wasn't a diver, but he
Okay.
knew that because I had just had a love of the ocean
Mm-hmm.
and the that environment that he knew.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we were little surf rats.
Okay.
You couldn't get us out of the ocean as kids.
Okay.
So it was a great fit.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I was a minor, and
Mm-hmm.
most people did not get certified to dive at that young of an age. My mom
Mm-hmm.
even had to sign the paperwork because I was under 18.
Right. Right.
And that was very challenging. So
Mm-hmm.
Outward Bound was a challenge, learning to persevere. Scuba diving, that was a big challenge. It's
Mm-hmm.
pretty uncomfortable in that cold water. Just really embrace the challenges and my
Mm-hmm.
curiosity and my desire to explore. And they supported that. They didn't
Mm-hmm.
try and suppress it.
Right. And it seems to me too that providing this experiential learning provided other avenues for you to develop competence and feel confident in yourself. And I can only imagine that that translated back to schoolwork. Like if I could
Yes.
learn how to scuba dive, if I could earn my certification, then I can conquer whatever schoolwork you have, or
Yeah.
you probably maybe you looked ahead and said, surely I can perform well on the SAT or whatever and apply to get
Mhm.
into college if you had
Yeah.
that vision at that particular time.
Yeah.
But I think that's a great way to really build resilience
Mhm.
and just build confidence in oneself, providing those types of experiences. So I think there's a great lesson to be learned for our listeners in that regard. So as you did pursue more of these outside experiences, what do you remember about how you felt about school and your schoolwork and all of that?
It's exactly what you said. It's about taking that success on Outward Bound and bringing it into the classroom and saying, you know what, on Outward Bound, I rappelled a 100-foot cliff. I was 15 years old. And I had this mantra, if I can rappel a 100-foot cliff at 15, I can get through this test. I can get through the SATs. I can do it. It's harder for me. It's different for me. But I had something to grasp onto that I had never had before. The other thing that was so important for me on Outward Bound is I wasn't the dyslexic student.
Okay.
I was just a kid on an Outward Bound adventure. I didn't have that label. And one of the things that happens on Outward Bound is that everybody gets a chance to be in a leadership role.
Okay.
And all of those skills that I had learned on the ocean with my dad also transferred to a river.
Okay.
So I led my boat crew through class 4 and 5 rapids. Yeah. And all of a sudden I was a leader. So it was at school, I was, this dumb, broken, brain damaged, dyslexic kid. When on Outward Bound, I was a leader. And that changed the whole trajectory of my life.
And so you bring that up about what it sounds like bullying at school.
Yep.
Yeah. So how did you navigate that, and how supportive were administrators during that time? Like, it sounds like at age 15, that was a big moment. You did Outward Bound. You earned your scuba diving license. But getting there, what was that like in school?
It was painful. It was painful, and it took sheer grit at times. Having a dad who is an Army veteran helps. It helps a lot. And he just always, but a big piece of it was always having their support. They believed in me. And that was critical. The bullying was really awful. That was in first and second grade. So I was trying to cope with this bias and low expectations and being written off by administrators.
Right.
And now I do want to point out that I did have some absolutely wonderful teachers.
Okay.
It was mostly the administrators and some of the special education teachers. So that was very frustrating. The bullying, because I was removed from the classroom for my special education support, I was different. And when you're different as a 6-year-old, as a 7-year-old, you become a target of bullies. And it was terrible. It went on for about 2 years.
Right.
And at first it was ignore them and, try and work through it. And they didn't look at bullying then the way they look at it now.
Right.
And
it seemed to be sort of a rite of passage back then. Kids will be kids.
Boys will be boys, girls will be girls. Yeah, exactly. But it did become pretty extreme. And I thank God I didn't go through that with Facebook and the internet.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah. So at least I could get away from it. And then also my summers, because we spent our time on Fire Island, I was away from that community as a whole. So that was helpful. But it did get to the point where my parents got very involved and got involved with the other parents. It was a small community, a New York City suburb, Croton-on-Hudson, which is pretty small. So all of the parents, if you have children in the same grade, you know each other.
Right.
So they got involved. And then the parents did take appropriate action. And the bullying stopped, but I was still ostracized. So, but the other side of that coin is that I learned to become very independent.
And that was what I was going to ask you, because there's childhood challenges and then just life challenges. We all are going to face them. And I'm curious how the experiences you had from the classroom, the social component of school, what happened there with bullying and all of that, how that helped you with big grown-up problems like marriage. You said that you were in an abusive marriage. How did that help you?
So I had two things going on at the same time. On one piece I had this Outward Bound, scuba diving, these experiences where I was learning to persevere and stand on my own 2 feet. And then on the other side, there was a piece of me that was deeply wounded and traumatized.
Sure.
So I had both of these things happening and they contradicted each other. So it was confusing, and it was so ingrained in my personality that it's so imposed on me that I didn't understand that it was even there. I used to joke and say I didn't have low self-esteem, I had no self-esteem, because I was constantly getting this message in school every day that I was subhuman, that I was brain damaged, I wasn't good enough, and that hurt. But then the contradiction, on the other hand, was that I could lead a boat crew on Outward Bound. I could rappel that 100-foot cliff and face that fear.
Do you want to connect your brand with families worldwide? ProPix by the Parenting 411 is your ticket to success. With over 20,000 followers and a podcast reaching more than 25 countries, we're talking family relationships, mental health, and raising awesome kids. Our past guests include doctors, psychologists, other medical professionals, counselors, New York Times bestsellers, award-winning actors, and others. ProPix amplifies your reach and boosts visibility to engage parents seeking the best for their families. Ready to join the big leagues? Visit ProPix by p411.com and let's take your brand to new heights. ProPix by p411.com. Amplify, boost, and drive your success in the parenting world.
So what kinds of things did you do? Like what kind of practices, or how were you able to change your mindset so that you could become confident?
Sure. So after I got, so I'll back up just a little bit, so this low self-esteem made me very vulnerable to predators.
Oh, okay.
And I ended up marrying a narcissist.
Okay.
And when I got out of that, I literally had to plan an escape. I did that. When I got out of that, I was completely traumatized. I was so traumatized, I was driving through stop signs and red lights. Couldn't think, couldn't function. And I had this surrender moment where I just looked up at the sky and surrendered. And I knew I had work to do. And I knew that if I didn't take a long, hard look at myself, that this was going to repeat itself. And I wasn't necessarily going to survive it the next time. And I wasn't willing to do that.
Right.
I really just wasn't willing to continue living the way I was living. Now that I never thought of self-harm, I want to be just crystal clear on that. But I knew I had work to do. And all of those skills, learning to persevere on Outward Bound, learning to persevere while scuba diving, just meant that I needed to get to work. And I needed to find ways to heal and grow. And I went to work with therapists, with coaches, and that was the beginning of moving from first becoming a survivor to moving into thriving.
Okay. And that brings me then, to your book, which is entitled Disempowered, and it talks about your journey. What were you hoping that parents and children who face similar challenges, what were you hoping they could get out of that?
Well, the first thing is that being dyslexic is nothing to do with intelligence.
Okay.
We just learn differently. And there are very specific measurable skills that dyslexic people have that normies don't have.
Okay. Like what?
Yeah, specifically things like creative problem solving, seeing patterns, seeing gist that other people miss. In fact, British intelligence services specifically looks to hire people who are documented as dyslexic because they see patterns and gist that other people miss.
Interesting.
It's very interesting. So that would just be one example. There are many, and there's a great book out there called The Dyslexic Advantage.
Okay.
Which is written by two MDs, and they dive into the specific skill sets that dyslexic people are really, really good at.
Okay.
And I like their credentials because they're two MDs, so I give it a lot of weight. I do want to point out too that I did go to college.
Right.
I did graduate, and I even earned a master's degree. I earned my MBA. So did what they said I couldn't do.
Now, today you're a life coach. and a dyslexia advocate. So, like, what strategies or resources would you recommend for parents who are seeking support? They are starting way back where you and your parents were. They've gotten the diagnosis and they want to support their children too. So, what would you recommend?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to get to know the laws.
Okay.
A child who is documented as dyslexic falls under the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Mm-hmm.
And that child has rights. The schools must make reasonable accommodations and provide services. Now, beyond that, there are going to be other state laws, depending on what state you live in, that may offer additional support. But that's going to be state specific. So the first thing to do is to do the research and find out what rights or services your child has a right to.
Okay.
So that would be the first step. The next step is believe in your child. Just believe in them, support them unconditionally. And I think the thing that I wish I had had as a child was a little bit more psychological support. Okay. Because I was being traumatized, and I don't think anybody understood that. And
I was going to say, I think back then, there just wasn't an understanding of that. Even people with good intentions just didn't know
they
that.
Didn't understand.
Yeah, we're learning a lot more about that now.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then, of course, I go back to that outward bound model of teaching perseverance, resiliency, and just mental toughness. One of the things I learned at a very early age is that if I worked 2, 3, 4 times harder than my fellow students, I could do it. I could do it. And I was willing to do that. I was not willing to let them be right.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
It is very powerful. And the advantage of that moving forward into adulthood is that you have a tremendous work ethic.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's something I can definitely say about my son as well. I think I can, he's 25 now. I have twin sons.
Oh my
but
gosh.
Speaking about him, and they're both hardworking, but he just knows. He just knows that he's got to work hard. That's really very much deeply rooted in who he is as a person. And so, like, his discipline is commendable. And sometimes that's what we get from our challenges, our lessons and all of that. And we all have them. And, his brother has his own different, something different that he has to work through. And that's really what I talked to them about when they were younger, that we all have hurdles that we have to cross over. We have to figure out the best way for us to work or to be successful and to create the environment. And it looks different, for different people. So to not feel less than because of whatever particular challenges you have. So if you had some closing thoughts for parents about anyone that wants to really help their children to overcome obstacles, develop resilience and perseverance, what would you say? What would you recommend?
I would say, teach your child to take on challenges.
Okay.
Because that's where you learn to persevere. One of the things that I used to do with my dad was just stack firewood. Okay. And we'd go outside on a Sunday afternoon and we'd stack a cord of firewood. We'd split it. He would split it and I would stack it. And I'd complain and I'd say, Dad, this is really hard. And he'd say, you know what? It puts hair on your chest. It's good for you. And I'd put my hand on my little girl hips and say, but Daddy, I'm a girl.
Right. Now, were you the only child?
No, I have a younger sister also.
Oh, you do? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he always had this mindset of that he was training me. And I think that came from his military background. And I think it was very natural. He also had this mindset, and he used to say this all the time. Everything I do for you girls has a reason. And I
Right.
never want you to ever have to be dependent on a husband. I want you to be able to stand on your own 2 feet and
Mm-hmm.
handle whatever life throws at you.
Mm-hmm.
And in the 1970s, with little girls, that was not common.
Right.
It was not
Right.
common. So I really was blessed
I was
with.
going to say, as you were talking about it, and really even earlier on, I felt like your parents really gave you a real gift. I mean, not only the support, but
Mhm.
the experiences and opportunities to develop yourself and to develop confidence and to overcome obstacles and prove to yourself even
You
that you were
know,
capable.
exactly. And it was all about taking on challenges. One of the
Hmm.
caveats that I would say, make sure it's an appropriate challenge for your
Hmm.
child.
Yes.
Obviously, don't go try to climb Mount Everest unless you're really know what you're doing. Pick
Hmm.
something that's appropriate physically, emotionally, mentally, and also age appropriate.
Right.
So
Right.
that's very important. My little disclaimer there. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
but taking on challenges and getting uncomfortable
Hmm.
just is where I really learned to persevere. And it's become
Hmm.
a lifelong process for me. And I'm constantly taking things on that are challenging.
Hmm.
I've done a civilian training program with retired Navy SEALs.
Hmm. Hmm.
That was a challenge.
Right.
I'm learning a new type of skiing, which is called telemark skiing, which is
What is
very,
that like?
it's so telemark skiing, your heel is not fixed to the ski, similar
Oh,
to a cross country ski.
okay.
So, but it's not cross country skiing, it's downhill, just like
Hmm.
regular alpine turns,
Hmm. Hmm.
alpine skiing.
Hmm.
So each turn, or you actually lunge backwards because your heel is free. So instead of a
Mm.
side to side turn,
Mm.
it's
Yes.
a front to back. And it is very difficult to learn.
Oh, it sounds like it.
It's
It
very
sounds
difficult.
like it.
I'm on year 3,
Hmm.
and I'm told that it takes 3 years for a expert alpine skier to transition to telemark. So I'm
Well,
right on track.
I'm
Um,
hardly an expert alpine skier. In fact, I have not gone skiing in, wow, might even be decades. It's been a long time since I've been skiing, so I may not be able to take up this new
it's a new one. Yeah.
this
Well, it's also,
new style of skiing.
sure.
But
It's also a function of my environment. I live in Colorado, and I live in
sure.
Colorado because I want that lifestyle. And that was the new
Hmm.
life that I created for myself.
I was gonna say, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like your childhood just taught you so many things,
Mhm.
how to be resourceful. It's really something that, in our own way as parents, that's what we should make sure is part of our children's lives. Of
Right.
course, tailored to where you live and what you're able to put together. It doesn't have to always be expensive, but that's what
Yep.
it's about. That continuous learning, that continuous
Exactly.
growth that I
Right.
think is so important. How can we follow you and your work?
Sure. Well, I have my website, which is ellenbusch.com. Ellen Busch is ELLEN. Bush, and Bush is BUSCH.
Hmm.
So our family joke is that it's like the beer, not like the president.
Oh, right. Okay.
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, ebush1500 and then also on Facebook. So I'm pretty easy to find.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I really thank you so much for coming in to join me with this powerful conversation. And I hope that our listeners and those who are watching remember that every child's journey is unique. I hope that's something you
Yes.
got from this conversation.
Yes.
And more importantly, with the right support, especially from your parents, your children can overcome even the toughest challenges. And if you're looking for practical ways to connect with your kids and foster resilience in their lives, be sure to grab a copy of my ebook, Connected Hearts Digital Smarts 25 Tips for Connecting with Your Kids Offline. This resource is packed with actionable advice to help you build stronger, more meaningful relationships with your children. And by taking these steps, you can empower them to thrive in a rapidly changing world. All you have to do is head on over to offlineconnectionguide.com. That's offlineconnectionguide.com. If you don't catch that, don't worry, it'll be in the show notes. But I thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to like and share this episode with your friends and family. And until next time, remember that it's never too late to be the parent you want to be. Thanks for joining, and I can't wait to see you next time.
We bring you this episode for the purpose of information and entertainment only. It is not the intent or purpose of the Parenting 411 podcast or Carol Maletta to provide an exhaustive reference or guide on all aspects of parenting, childcare, and family life. You are strongly encouraged to read all available information, consult medical or other appropriate professionals, and pursue all reasonable means to learn as much as possible about parenting to complement what you gain here, and then tailor the information to meet your individual needs. Yes, parenting is a serious matter, though it is not an exact science. The context and insights offered in this and every episode represent an account of knowledge and personal experiences of the host and any featured guests for the viewers' and listeners' information and consideration. The host and guests do not guarantee to our viewers or listeners any specific parenting outcomes from this episode or taking actions described here.